by sharing my screen and welcoming everybody. So give me 1 minute so I can make sure the slideshow is starting now. All right. All right, so hopefully you guys are able to see the screen, essentially. So welcome to the Black Wealth Gap seminar in conjunction with the University of Kentucky School of Law. And we want to thank you for joining us on behalf of Beta Gamma Omega, chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I am Tanea Reed. I'm the co-chair of Target 3. So I'd like to share a little bit of what Target 3 entails for the sorority. Okay. And so Target 3 for Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated emphasizes financial planning, asset accumulation, and wealth building, including savings, investments, managing debt, and improving credit. Our 4 main objectives include personal financial planning and asset accumulation, credit repair and monitoring, entrepreneurship, and the Black Dollar 365, as well as Operation AKA Assist. So I'd like to go over a few ground rules while we get it set up for today's fantastic webinar. So we do ask that you listen to the information. You put all questions in the chat because we are going to have a question and answer period, about 10 to 15 minutes, close to the hour. And we do ask that you stay muted during the webinar. So now I will toss it over to our other chair of Target 3, Marilyn Clark.
Thank you, Tanea. We are really excited to have everybody join us tonight. We've been talking about this webinar for quite some time. So I just want to frame the topic, and I want to talk about why this particular topic is important. Black Americans are about 13% of the nation's population, but possess about 2.6% of the nation's wealth. So one of the reasons the wealth gap matters in terms of Black-white differences is because it's such a critical index of the cumulative effects across generations of racial injustice in the United States. We should think of wealth beyond income from our jobs. Think about the value of your home, your stocks and bonds, your real estate, insurance, and other assets that you can pass on to future generations. So when you have wealth, you can purchase a home in a very established neighborhood with high resale values. You can ensure your children get a high quality education. You can have access to better health care. You can participate in the political process because it costs to run for elected offices. If you lose your job, you have accumulated wealth. You can weather that storm much more easily. You can leave an inheritance to future generations to secure their economic well-being. And so wealth is a much stronger indicator of our economic security. So tonight we've chosen this topic because we feel that it is fundamental to our economic well-being. If we get this right, then we can understand some of the historical factors that brought us here. If we can begin to understand how to build wealth, then we can change the trajectory of our families in their economic well-being. So tonight we have 3 of our own from the University of Kentucky Rosenberg School of Law here to tell us their personal stories tied to the topic, the Black Wealth Gap. So I would like to introduce Danny Murphy, and I will allow Danny to introduce his team. So Danny is with the UK Rosenberg School of Law. He's a senior assistant dean of community engagement and operations and a chief diversity officer there. He's a former partner of McMurray and Livingston Law Firm in Paducah. He's a former counsel at Wyatt Tarrant and Combs Law Firm. He is the past board chair and current executive committee member of Commerce Lexington. He's on the board, vice chair for Community Action Council, and he's also a board member for the Ed Brown Society, Junior Achievement of Bluegrass, and Kentucky YMCA Youth Association. So welcome, Danny.
Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you, Tanea, for setting this up tonight. We are very glad to be here with you. First, to get started, we feeling the energy, or hope you are, of the exciting news today that for the first time in 233 years, we have a woman of color, or let's be more pointed, an African-American or a Black woman who is going from judge to justice of the United States Supreme Court. And so we are celebrating today the confirmation of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. So everybody it's a good day. It's a good day. And the 233 years that it took to happen really ties into some of the things that we will talk about today in the history of our country, that was a step forward. And it gives us some hope that after we tell our stories tonight and talk about some ways that we begin to increase wealth in the Black community, that some things will begin to change within the system to begin to allow those things to happen. And also what we will be able to do going forward. So we have two students with us tonight, and I'll introduce them. None of us are experts. It's not our research or our background about the historical factors that have created the Black wealth gap that we know exists. Neither are we experts on what it takes to get to that next level, to reduce this gap and build that wealth. What we will share tonight is that we just happen to be living testimonies of what that gap represents, even among some of the highest educated Black professionals in obtaining our law degree. So we're just going to tell our stories. Some of you may have similar stories. Some of you may have more knowledge about these topics and areas, but we appreciate the opportunity to come on tonight. So we have two students. One is Kenneth Trotter Jr. He's a second-year student here at UK Rosenberg College of Law. He is a member of the Black Law Students Association mock trial team and the college's trial advocacy board and team. He's also part of the street law program. Under street law, we have law students. Chantel, who I'll introduce next, is also part of that, but our students go into two high schools. Right now, we're in the Learning Center and Martin Luther King Academy. For the last few years, we'd also been in Bryan Station High School, and they teach students about the law, different topics of the law. So very successful pro bono partnership that we have with Fayette County Public Schools. Kenneth is also a recipient of the UK Lyman T. Johnson Bear Award. He's a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. This summer, he will clerk at Dinsmore and Shoals Lexington office and Valvoline. And last summer, he was a summer associate at Stoll, Keenan and Ogden's Lexington office and Kentucky American Water. Our other student on here tonight, if you go back a slide for me tonight, is Chantel Davis. Chantel is also a second-year law student. She is a member of the college's moot court, which is oral advocacy, as well as the trial advocacy boards. She serves on a newly created Dean's DEI Student Advisory Board. And that is a student board that advises our dean and senior administrators on various issues impacting the College of Law with diversity. She is vice president of the street law program that I just mentioned. She received an award last weekend, very distinguished award, in the name and honor of one of our accomplished alumni. Chantel was just named the Rebecca Westerfield Excellence in Leadership Award recipient last Saturday at our Women's Law Caucus annual spring brunch. And she also, in her first year, received the Best Oral Argument Award for her class in her legal writing section. She hails from Pittsburgh. Kenneth is from Chicago. I should have mentioned that earlier. And this last summer, Chantel clerked for Kopka Pincus Dolan Law Firm in Lexington, served as a research assistant to one of our faculty members, and she is a member of Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated. Students, I really appreciate them being on here tonight. This is one of the most stressful times of the semester, April and October for our students. So law students, they get one grade for each class that they have. It all rides on the final exam. And then they also are in the middle of doing some oral arguments for one of their classes. So it's a big deal that they could take the time out tonight, but they are our future. And so hope you enjoy, I know you will enjoy and I look forward to hearing their stories. So just some historic background on me. I am first in my entire family, which is a very large family, particularly on my dad's side. He has 12 siblings, and I'm the first one in the family out of 64 first cousins to graduate from college. My father is a longtime tractor trailer driver, retired from Wild Turkey Distillery in Lawrenceburg, where I grew up. And he's currently still driving at 72 for FedEx. And then my mother is a retired factory worker from Osram, Sylvania in Versailles. I grew up in small town Kentucky in Lawrenceburg, where, like most small towns in the Midwest and South particularly, 95% of the Black population in that town lives in the same section of the town, usually on the other side of railroad tracks. And those of you that know, usually on streets named after states, trees, and presidents. And so I was no exception. I grew up on Lincoln Street in Lawrenceburg. And I wanted to be an attorney since I was 14 years old. I saw things happening in the criminal justice system then based on charges against those in the Black community versus the white community that really upset me, and I wanted to make a difference in the criminal justice system. And there were other things happening as well. So I decided at 14 that I was going to UK undergrad and planned to go to UK law school, and that ended up coming true. After law school, I moved to Paducah, Kentucky, where I went to work for the first firm mentioned, McMurray and Livingston, and then also then later came back to Lexington and worked for Wyatt Terrence Combs, where I served as counsel. As we began to talk about the racial wealth gap, and I'll go more into my background, I would like to cover some slides quickly that Marilyn put together. And if it's possible, because I'm going through them quickly, you all forgive me tonight, my allergies are acting up. I'm going through them quickly, and Marilyn, I don't know if it's possible that you share it with some of the other attendees at a different time. But based on Marilyn's research, she found that a study in 2019 showed that the typical white family had $184,000 in wealth compared to $38,000 for the typical Hispanic family and $23,000 for the Black family. Next slide for me, Tanea. And so when we began to talk about what is wealth and the accumulation of valuable economic resources, the net worth of a family, and when you look at the market value of everything that you own and you take away the debt, that's what we're talking about when it comes to wealth. Not really wealthy if I have $1 million house and I had the $950,000 mortgage still owed on it. So next slide. But then with our stories tonight, we hope that you will think about some of the historical context on who we are and what we are. The familiar terms that you know with 40 acres and a mule, and the Jim Crow laws and segregated and unequal schools, loans, either the ability not to get them or getting them at terrible interest rates, and inability to get education loans to go to school. And even when you could get loans, I'll talk a little bit here shortly, where were you permitted to buy homes? Next slide. And things that continue despite our best efforts to broaden this gap, keep us from being able to close the gap when it came to credit cards and high interest debt, and unable to get capital or access to loans, even when you made mistakes, to be able to get out of that situation. And for most Black families, zero to little life insurance and zero to little equity that you ever build in owning property. Next slide. And continuing today with what some people would call new Jim Crow laws. A lot of laws we see happening in Congress in Frankfurt right now, they wouldn't call it Jim Crow, but it has the same effect, affecting our public school opportunities, affecting our voting rights, affecting laws that were to protect us from discrimination based on race. We see this repeating itself all over again, with the impact of felony records and inability to get employment, and wage disparities and healthcare, and underperforming schools in certain districts. Next slide, Tanea. And I hope that you will give thought tonight as you listen to our stories and we get to the Q&A part about how do we bridge the gap then. We don't want to just talk about it is what it is, but how do we begin even tonight and going forward to get more educated and put into practice those things that can move our entire community forward, one household at a time and one generation at a time. Furthering education, home ownership, getting life insurance, understanding investment opportunities in 401k retirement, savings, getting into business the right way, doing things the right way, and learning to advocate through policy issues and all these other things that are necessary to eliminate the wage gap. So I'll stop there on the slides. And I'll go back to where I mentioned being in that law firm in Paducah. I had a real light bulb moment, you all, when I first started practice, made it through law school and other things, but realized how little I knew about how the world was operating. And I told you I wanted to do criminal defense and my partners, but I came out of law school deciding I would do litigation, representing really more businesses. But the firm knew I had an interest in criminal defense in other areas, so they let me sit in any meeting I wanted to with different clients. And I remember early on in Paducah, an African-American grandmother knew that I was in town and with this firm, and she came in the office with her daughter, and the grandson or the daughter's son was in jail on his second felony. And I believe it was drug trafficking. It was drug trafficking charges, second time. And here was this opportunity to help this family and figure out if we could do something for this young man that might help him change his life. And so this was what empowered me initially to go to law school, even though it wasn't the area I was focusing on in practice at the time. And I'll never forget my partner, one of my law partners, one of the best in Paducah with criminal defense, told the grandmother that we would work very hard to get her grandson a good deal, or if we didn't like the deal or they didn't like it, we would take it to trial. But in order to do so, we needed $5,000. See, I never thought about the money aspect of the law practice and the impact and what that meant in people you represented. That grandmother went to the bank. She told me she had $6,000 in savings her entire life. She took out $5,000 of that $6,000 and gave it to my firm to represent her grandson. We got that young man a deal, but she got nothing back in return financially for the little bit of savings she had accumulated. It went to the firm. $5,000. Had we had to take that case to trial, it was going to be $10,000 to take it to trial. I sat 2 weeks later with a partner who did business law, and this man came in, a white man who had a really successful business going, and his CPA had told him, he had an accountant, had told him that for tax purposes and protection of personal liability, he needed to have the law firm set up a corporation for him. Setting up a corporation, I took one class related. That a lot of foreign terms for me in that class and what that really meant. But corporations and knowing how much money this man was making, all I could think was, well, if we just charged a grandmother $5,000 for a criminal case, and this man's making this much money, how much will we charge him to set up an LLC or an S corporation for him? At that time, $850 is all it cost him for us to set that up. This man was going back out the door and making that money back within hours. And then I really took an interest in real estate law. So particularly with those of you that own homes, the attorneys behind the scenes working for the banks, doing the title work to make sure you're getting clear title and the bank's getting a good mortgage. And so my partners knew I liked it and they let me close my first home, close a transaction for some clients on their first home for a bank. The house purchase was around $150,000. The house we lived in when I grew up, when my parents finally bought it, was only about $60,000. $150,000 was a lot of home as far as I was concerned and what I knew growing up. And again, I thought, well, how much money will we make? Doing all of this legal work, I can't wait to see how much I get to bring in for the firm off this deal. I closed that deal. My fees for the firm that went to the firm, those people only had to pay $425. Never forget that. $425,000 for a $150,000 home that when I began to understand would appreciate in value, that within 6 months, probably less than that, these people were getting their $425 back in equity in the house. That man paid a $850, close to $1,000. He was getting that back, but that Black grandmother would never see the money. And so I began to see if we want to change the Black community, then criminal defense is not where it is. It continues to be a drain financially. We need good lawyers to do the work, but I then put my time into volunteering to figure out how do we stay out of the system. And that's a different talk for a different time tonight. But I began to focus on real estate law because I knew we didn't have enough African-American attorneys in business law and real estate to begin to talk to our people about what it meant and begin to assist in ways that could change households and generations to come. So when it comes, and I'm going to just touch on a few things before we hear from our students, when it comes to what impacts Black wealth, particularly as it relates to real estate, I began to see the historical issues that were related to redlining. Some of you may be familiar with that term, but as I mentioned, growing up in Lawrenceburg, we were all in one section of the neighborhood. I remember my parents trying to rent other houses outside of the neighborhood and being turned down, seeing my dad come to the car dejected because he realized that that same landlord that seemed interested on the phone lost interest quickly when he realized the family pulling up was a Black family. When my parents were finally able to purchase a home and get a bank to agree to it, which was still at some ridiculous loan terms, interest terms, as I look back at it, they were only allowed to buy in one section. Couldn't seem to get approval in other areas of the neighborhood. So when at 12 years old, when they finally buy a home in this Black neighborhood, understand the other thing about Black neighborhoods you don't find in white neighborhoods is the makeup of the very same people. You have renters with homeowners. You have the garbage truck driver living next to the IBMers and the Lexmark people. We were all one community that you don't often see that kind of demographic and makeup in the in white communities. But my parents finally buy their home when I'm 12, and they divorced about 10 years later when I was 22. And you can imagine that, and you probably know that when they went to sell that house and they paid down the mortgage, what little they could because of the interest rate, I think my parents came away with about $2,000 in equity after 10 years of ownership. And that's all they had to restart after their divorce. You take that same house, those of you that live in Lexington or been here long enough, you take that house in Oakwood, you take that house in Green Acres or Winburn, back in the day, particularly where strong middle-class Black families working at IBM and universities, the hospitals, the school system, very prominent families that I consider when I used to visit Lexington, upper Black middle class to me. Just take those homes today and that $150,000 house in Oakwood, if you take it out to Clays Mill Road or Southland Drive, that same house today would be worth over $300,000, more than double. And you take the situation where those very same families, whether they lived in Oakwood or Green Acres or Winburn, or they lived Southland Drive and Clays Mill, both families paid off those homes. Both families leave those homes to their children and grandchildren. But the stark difference in how much wealth they leave often occurs because of redlining and the systemic racism that's been in place in America and presented us to do anything about it. I want to just go through quickly here so we can get to the students. The issues often go beyond home ownership. If you take the districts that are predominantly Black and you look at the school systems, that also make up those districts. If you think about it, central office allocates a budget to each of those schools for those schools to run, for those schools and those students to participate in extracurricular activities outside of class that enhance their education, be it clubs, be it band, cheerleading, sports, all these things that give kids an extra leg up, opportunity to be able to go to college and get college paid for. School system budgets, some of you that work in the system know it better than me, but they only go so far. If you look at the difference between a Dunbar and Henry Clay and a Bryan Station and a Tates Creek, and me having kids at Bryan Station, being very involved in their activities, their opportunities are different because of the private giving that goes in to supplement those schools. If you take the businesses that make up the north end of town where Bryan Station is, and our kids going to those businesses, used car lots, buy here, pay here, pawn shops, restaurants, and some good businesses over there with some of the small retail, and asking them for donations, versus if I live in a district where the businesses are accounting firms, insurance companies, I already said CPAs, doctors' offices, White, Greer, Maggard, orthodontics. You go up and down that list when you ride around and realize not only are those businesses supporting, but the household incomes in those schools able to write checks to help entire programs. It's a stark difference. And a lot of that goes back to the neighborhoods that make up those schools and the lack of resources that are there that continue today widening the gap, or if we're trying to narrow it, certainly not making much of an impact. And so it goes beyond just home ownership. It's the makeup and demographics in the households, in our education districts, as well as the businesses that could otherwise support them. My daughter, when she first started going over to Bryan Station area more, was like, Dad, why are there so many strip clubs over here? We don't see them on the other side of town, and in what's taking place. So we'll start to talk about later then, what do we do going forward? But everything I just mentioned, that's been my life and where I am. And my wife, who is a lawyer and judge now, we sat in what we thought and believe what we know was a good home and a good neighborhood in Masterson Station. But oftentimes out on the street talking to very good neighbors and picking up at some point that their household income was less than ours, maybe even half in some cases, but yet they seem to be twice as ahead further than we were, despite us having our law degrees and what we've been able to accomplish in our careers. And some of them friends, we knew it came from their start, their investment, their down payment money. They're not having to pay the same type of car payment because of gifts from mom, dad, grandparents, and other people that have been able to pass down the generational wealth that takes place. So I'll stop there. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Trotter next. Or Marilyn, were you jumping in? Okay, Mr. Trotter.
Thank you, Dean Murphy. You actually kind of touched on one of the things I want to speak about, and that's education. He explained to everyone that I'm from Chicago, but specifically I'm from the South Side of Chicago. Growing up, I wouldn't have known this. Now, being an adult, I realized, and it's a fact, that Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the country. And it's very evident in the education system. So the way the education system works in Chicago is, for the public schools, you must live in the neighborhood to go to the schools, which might be common in other places, but it's very disadvantageous in Chicago for obvious reasons. So the way it's set up is, even kindergarten through 8th grade, if you live in the neighborhood, that's the school you go to. However, there's this thing called selective enrollment. So I will start with my high school. My high school is called Morgan Park High School. It used to be a really good school. In fact, Mae Jemison graduated from Morgan Park High School. Back in the day, it was really known for its academics, but it's also predominantly white. So just to show you the stark difference, once the school did become more Black and the area became more Black people, more Black families wanted to send their children to the school Mae Jemison went to, a school that's really good. They started losing a lot of funding. So when I got there, I did a school tour. We got to see different classrooms, and one of the classrooms was a wood shop, home economics, those type of classrooms. When school started, I was looking for on the itinerary, when do I sign up for the electives? What electives do you have? Home economics, so I can learn more real life experience things. Oh, I'm sorry, we no longer offer those classes because we don't have the funding. So imagine my surprise, knowing this is the school that Mae Jemison graduated from, and we don't have the funding. So recently, I'm in my a class called Law and Inequality in the Law. We had to write a reflection paper about realigning and just the inequalities in homing and displacements of Black people in their cities. So we learned about this thing called racial covenants, racially restrictive covenants, where it was legal to put in the deeds to homes where you couldn't sell the home to certain races. Now, racism usually has a statement that you think of the South when you think of racism and racial inequality, but it was very prevalent in Chicago. In fact, it made me think these neighborhoods were created by these racial covenants. You can only go where you can buy the house or where you can live. And then they put you in that area, and then they give you a school and they don't fund that school. And then what happens? You go through an underfunded education system, and then you don't get the grades, or you don't have the standardized test scores to get into the great high school that you want to go to. So I looked up my high school just because I wanted to know what its reputation is now currently. The school Mae Jemison went to. So there's this website called niche.com. You can look up what the reputation is, the administration, academics, sports, all type of things. My high school, the school I went to while I was there, have you seen Lean on Me? Eastside High is the best way I can describe it, honestly. It was not a place that was known for academics. And we did have an international baccalaureate program. For those who don't know what the international baccalaureate program is, there you have your IP classes, your AP classes, advanced placement, your honors programs. IB is supposed to be above those. So I was in that program, luckily enough. But they treated that segment of the school or those students way different from the other students. So the teachers that we had access to, the administration we had access to, seemed like a whole nother school. And that's an issue. That is the big issue, because if you can afford it for half of the school, you should be afforded for majority of the school at least. So I want to say this. You go into underfunded kindergarten to 8th grade, then because you don't get the academic resources that you need to test well on the standardized test, you then go to the underfunded high school. Well, I'm going to go through it step by step. So my high school has a C- overall. Niche, you can go on niche.com, search up Morgan Park High School. C-. Predominantly Black neighborhood, right on 111th and Vincennes. There's another school right down the street called Morgan Park Academy. This is the private school, majority white, tuition crazy high. I don't remember what it is, but for the neighborhood that it's in, it's more than likely the people that live in that neighborhood cannot afford that school. So I will go through the statistics of my high school, right down the street. A D+, D+ in admin, something like that. We have a C- in academics, 10% efficiency in reading, 8% in math. We have an A in athletics, though, of course, the public school. However, Morgan Park Academy, right down the street, 2 blocks away, their students are almost 100% graduation rate. A's in everything on the stat sheet, A's, A+, A-, whatever it is. And I think to myself, we're schools just straight down the street from each other. So to me, it seems that they placed a school right in this neighborhood that says, well, if you can afford it, you can go to it. But realistically, how do you believe that people in this area could really afford tuition of thousands of dollars when there's a public school that their tax dollars are paying for? No, they're not going to send their students to that school. So that allows people who don't live in that neighborhood to reap the benefits of schools in that neighborhood. And if that's not enough, there are public schools, good public schools that aren't in the best neighborhood. For example, Whitney Young, Lynn Bloom. However, these are called selective enrollment schools now, where they're set up where if you live in that neighborhood, you only get to go to that school if you could test high enough. But that there is an issue because, like I said, kindergarten through 8th grade, you went to an underfunded public school. You have to take this thing called just your selective enrollment test. If you're in an underfunded school and all your funding is going to just teaching the basics, math, science, social studies, reading, when do you have a curriculum to help you prepare for the selective enrollment test? What teacher can you then pay to give up their Saturdays or their weekends so they can teach these underfunded students to prepare for the selective enrollment test? This leads the students to end up at the school that they can only get in because their parents are already paying for tax dollars, or because they can't now go to the selective enrollment that happens to be in their neighborhood because that same neighborhood school that they went to wasn't able to prepare them enough. And then what happens then? The families that were not affected by redlining, families that have generational wealth, the families that have generational education, they can now instill those into their children, supply them with the tools that they need, the money, the funding that they need to go to that private school that's gonna get them where they need to be. So now we've covered high school. You go to the underfunded high school, then what? You have to take your ACT, your ACT and the SAT. But the cycle continues. You go to the underfunded school with underfunded students, underfunded teachers. Who prepares you for these standardized tests? This is where it all starts. If you start off not knowing, you continue not knowing, continue to do. But when will you know? I was fortunate enough to make it to college. A lot of people that I've grown up with, a lot of my friends, they got to go to maybe a community college if they finished. Most of them did finish. And because of why? They grew up in the same system as me. I was the lucky one. So I say all this because the Black wealth gap, without education, is very hard to get to the money, to change anything, to be qualified for those jobs. Because so far now, the bachelor degree has been a holding point for Black people for so long. I would hire for this position. I'm not racist or anything. I would hire for this position, but you don't have a bachelor's degree. Well, now more and more Black people are getting to that bachelor's degree. And now what? They're trying to devalue the bachelor's degree. The education system. If we're not getting the funding we need compared to our white counterparts, our counterparts from any other race, or just neighborhoods from any other race, where can we progress? And this has been something that's been an issue since Jim Crow, segregation, redlining, not getting the loans that you're qualified for. The educational wealth, the generational wealth, it's all there. So to me, the Black wealth gap won't change until we are able to do something about the educational system. I don't have anything, I don't have a solution for this issue. All I can say is that I'm hopeful for the future as more Black people are becoming more educated and are taking those positions of power. We have a lot more Black lawyers. We just had the Balsa Losa event, and Dean Murphy gave very wise words along with Dean Davis. And they told us that the law school just 10, 20 years ago didn't look like it does now. Not as diverse, not as colorful, I would say. And that's what we need. We need more places, more spaces that look like us. People that are going to be there to open that door. In fact, that is why I want to be a lawyer. I've known I wanted to be a lawyer since 3rd grade. So the story was I really want to be an NFL or an NBA, but I stopped growing early. I stopped growing and I figured the best option is to use my brain. The only person I had to look towards for that was my cousin. My dad is a fireman. My mom was a nurse before she passed. My cousin was an attorney and he used to take me to take your child to work day. I used to go there to do the mock debates. I got to see all the guys in suits. My cousin was the only Black person there though, so I was mostly just talking to him. But I say all this because even in the educational system, we don't have Take Your Child to Work Day anymore. We barely have career fairs. Why is that? Why are we taking away opportunities? Why are we taking away resources and tools that young Black kids need in order to be successful in this world? It doesn't make sense to me. But that's why another reason why I wanted to be an attorney, not simply for the check. You know, the checks will be nice, hopefully. But somebody's got to be there to open that door. Somebody's got to be there for that kid in the underfunded school with underfunded teachers to look up and say, okay, if he made it through, I can make it through. And not even that, to be that person to show that kid how to make it through. To be that person, that kid can, okay, how do I study for a standardized test? Because nothing I learned at school is going to be on this test. Where do I go? Where are these resources? Who did you talk to make it to where you are today? That blueprint is so necessary. That generational education, that generational wealth is what we need to go and pass along to the youth. And that is what I'm about. And I think I'll leave it there. If you haven't been here already, I do have to get to class. But I definitely appreciate being here, being able to tell my story and speak with all of you.
Thank you, Kenneth, and Chantel and I will hold down the Q&A session for you and catch up with you. So, Chantel, you've had to listen to these guys talk, and I apologize that I went a little long because I want to hear your story as well.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chantel Davis. I'm originally from, my family's from Pittsburgh, but I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I'm gonna kind of touch on education as well, because that was a big factor for me. I'm still in the process of trying to bridge my own family's wealth gap. So I don't have much expertise in that, as Dean Murphy has mentioned. But for me, I grew up in a single parent household, and my father passed when I was 12 years old. And so there are 4 of us, of my mother's children, who I live with. And I'm the first in my family to, I'm a first generation student. My mom went back and got her nursing degree towards the end of my high school career. But I didn't grow up with any benefits of that. And so I would be the first person in my family to go to college right after high school. I have a master's degree from Duquesne University in clinical mental health counseling. I was the first person in my family to go and achieve that. And I'll be the first attorney in my family. And a lot of what I've seen growing up was the benefit that education has. So I've always received kind of a diversity scholarship or award. So I went to a private grade school because they gave 3 scholarships to people who lived in low income housing. And I was one of those students. But my brothers had to go to the public school. So I seen the difference in our education and what we received from day one. And I was fortunate enough to do well and go to a magnet high school. And I seen the difference in how we were prepared for school, how we were prepared for the SATs. And so I was more prepared. I was on a different path than my brothers, and we lived in the same household. But my mom always made sure that we knew that education would be the key. And so while I was in high school, I watched my mom work 2 jobs and go to night school to be a nurse. And through that, you know, I seen our lifestyle change. So we went from low income and food stamps and you know, subsidized healthcare, and then almost overnight that changed, right? When she got her degree and was able to start working and getting some of that money, our circumstances changed. And it wasn't always pretty though. The beginning steps weren't clear, because if you know anything about you know, government housing, you have a subsidized you know, light bill, rent, and everything like that. But it seems like the day that my mom got her degree, all of that changed. So she was paying almost triple in rent because we couldn't afford to move right away. All the bills started coming in food's already high for 4 kids. And she had never paid really what full price would be. And so there wasn't that time to accumulate savings. There wasn't that time to transition. So it was like, even though she took one step forward, it was like almost a step back, and that she was still scrounging, trying to get some money together. So when I went off to college, I didn't have a parent sending me care packages. I didn't have my mom didn't come and visit a lot because she couldn't afford to go back and forth. When I went home for holidays, like I worked throughout my whole college career and my master's degree because I just didn't have that security fund set up. And so being at school was my first time seeing Black people from middle class, Black people who grew up with 2 parents, and how their families and their dynamics worked. And that's when I really started to see that there's just a difference. It wasn't just a Black issue, right? It was about where we were from. It was about the schools that we went to, the opportunities that our parents were afforded. And I was able to see more of the generational effects, and how that played a role in the way things were set out. And I'm still experiencing things like that in law school. So when I came to law school, I thought I wanted to, and I still do have interest in criminal law, and I have interest in going and doing public interest work. But I've learned that it's a privilege to even to be able to do that, right? Because those are internships and jobs that don't pay over the summer. And I can't afford not to pay because my mom can't help me with my rent. My mom's not going to help me with my car note. And so then I have to choose between going and trying to accumulate some money so I can do what I have to do, or feeling like I'm not going after what I actually want to do, because there's such a stark difference. And so that's something we talk about often. I'm also in the law and inequality class that Kenneth mentioned. And that's something that we talk about. How do we make it easier for people to, go into those fields and want to be public defenders, the people that we need to help when they can't really get in there and make a living, especially if you're coming in and you have to take out all of these loans. You have to, you're going to have those repayments. It's almost like you're going to dig yourself in a hole, and be overworked and undercompensated. And so even now, where have an opportunity to work for a firm who's going to compensate me well this summer, and I'm really excited about the opportunity. And they just today, they sent an email and said, hey, we're going to have this retreat. It's going to be all covered. We'll cover for your transportation and your hotel. All you have to do is pay up front and we'll reimburse you. And I was like, I can't afford to do that. And so I don't know how many of my other peers had to respond back to the project coordinator and say, hey, I want to go to this opportunity, but I can't afford, I don't have a card to give you so that you can be reimbursed later. I don't even know how long that's going to be. That's going to dictate what I eat. That's going to dictate if I'm able to go home after classes end for a bit. That's going to, my bills, you know what I mean? And so even still, where I'm in a pursuit of a degree and trying to close that gap, there's always a constant reminder about, the differences that the position that I'm in versus my peers. And that's something that I've always been cognizant of. And it's something that pushed me to go into the legal field. Yes, I want to make a change. I feel like I'm an advocate. I'm always going to have public service and community in my heart. But honestly, I needed something that was going to be a real and tangible change financially. Because I did work in mental health work. I was working at addiction centers. I worked at a women's shelter, a battered women's shelter. And that was work that was fulfilling. It was great. But you're also putting in 70 hours for like $35,000 a year. And that's just not going to cut it, especially when I went into so much debt to even get the degrees that got me there. And so for me, it was a motivating factor, one, for longevity and stability, to try and get this degree so that I can turn that into things that will be, generational. So now my network, I know people who are doctors. I know people who are lawyers. I know people who can be resources for my family and friends as I've gone on. So education has helped create that network for me because my parents didn't have it. Even joining my sorority, I was the first person to join my sorority, but I had to crowdfund from my family to raise that money to join because it's expensive. And so coming to college, I remember I tried to friend all of the Black students who were coming to law school, and get to know us. There's probably about 6 to 8 of us. And I tried to friend them all on Facebook to see. And a common thing that I noticed, almost all of us were raising money and crowdfunding, asking for donations to help get us to law school, to help with moving fees, to help with the $2,000 in books that you have to, purchase. And it's a real financial cost. And one of the things my mom told me when I was talking about these loans and if I was going to do it is like, no matter what you do, because the position we're in, unless you get loan forgiveness, you're probably going to die with these loans. So go ahead and get it. Go ahead and go. My mom is someone who's always been realistic with me. She, when my grandmother passed and she didn't have any life insurance or anything like that, my mom bore the brunt of those burial costs. And it was that day that my mom went out and got policies for everybody, not to scare us, not to think that something was going to happen, but as something that will be tangible wealth after she would pass on. If anything should happen to any of us, there's policies on us to help prepare us for anything that could happen. And learning that life insurance, you should think about it as a supplement to a salary if a loved one passed. You should think about it as a way to set up your next generation and not as a last minute ditch effort. Because I know a lot of students or a lot of my peers who like, oh, when my granddad passed, he left me all of this money. Or when my dad passed, he left me all of this money. Or I got the car, I got the house, I got things. And I've never heard anything like that. There's nobody in my family I can relate to in that same situation. We are the first generation. My mom and my stepdad, they own their house, but only because my stepdad, that house has been in his family. But his family, like he's only had a high school degree, but he got that and that house has stayed in his family in so long. And so no matter how many degrees that my mom gets, his income it doesn't matter about his income, his equity is almost more than hers because she has that, he doesn't. He has a house, and that can be passed on to my brothers afterwards and different things like that. So going through the education system, it has helped me see the different levels of the wealth gap and helped me see almost a light at the end of the tunnel, right? I've talked to so many people who have been able to pay off their loans. It isn't impossible. I've talked to a lot of people who are doing credit repair, who are doing helping people get through loan forgiveness. I can't wait to graduate so I can go to the Black loan doctor, who's a Black woman who has made it her mission to help people get out of this and create financial freedom. And so I know we're running close to time, but I just wanted to share my story and what it looks like to me on this path to closing the wealth gap and trying to bridge it. And I'm happy to chat with you guys if there are any questions.
I'm just blown away sitting here, just trying to absorb everything. I'm wow. I just want to thank you all because this has just been truly fantastic. It really has. But Danny, I didn't know if you wanted me to share the books before we went into questions. I know that your time is precious, so I just wanted to see how you wanted to handle that portion.
We'll do what you want. I'm flexible. We're on you all's time. I don't know about Chantel's schedule.
Yeah.
I'm here. I can be here.
Somebody has a question before we go on to the books. I want to echo what Tanea said, that the stories are so real. And I think probably many of us on this call have the same story, and if we could tell our story, they would be very similar indeed. So thank you so much for sharing and being open in doing so.
I don't see any questions just yet, but if anybody has a question, just please feel free to put it in the chat and we will open it up and have some great discussion for any questions that we get.
Okay.
I'm not watching
your TV. Oh. I'm on up.
Okay, thank you, Clarissa. One of the things I will say is I'm glad you brought up the insurance because that is the way that I see a lot of people pass down generational wealth. You know, I was on a trip and a friend was talking about she only got $30,000 from a second removed uncle or cousin, and she was disappointed. So generally, we are sometimes passing the hat to bury our loved ones. So I do see one question.
Actually.
Mhm.
One is just kind of like you said, Marilyn, just hearing a little bit more about how insurance plays a role in the wealth gap, especially life insurance.
I'm glad to start just from the practice. I did a little bit of estate planning as well. And Marilyn touched on it, particularly for Black families. We're not even, most of us, a lot of us don't have the insurance at all. So we're passing the hat, going further in the debt, trying to pay for the funeral. When we do have the insurance, understand that historically, when the insurance salesmen were walking around to my grandparents and my parents, they were only talking about burial policies. No one was talking about what Chantel stated, that no, you need enough insurance to replace the salary in case one of the working people in the family was to die. And so even if you buried and we had that, we still were going further in reverse because there wasn't enough money there to support the family. So insurance has been one of those biggest factors. I would say insurance. And then if I could touch on the next one, just about the question about what new college graduates should be investing in. The other thing I saw in practice was the lack of people putting money into their 401k retirement and receiving that match from the firm. I'm sorry, from your company or your business, your firm for me. So if the firm is willing to match up to 10% of my salary in an investment for my retirement, then I should be taking the steps to put that 10% from my salary in there so that it grows and creates the wealth. But no one taught me that. I happen to have a Black investment manager early on that told me to focus on those things, understanding my background, that I couldn't do IRAs, I can't do stock, not with student loans. I can't do stock today, to be candid. But he taught me some of the basics that if I can't do it for me now, I'll be able to do it for the next generation after I pass.
Yes.
One thing I did want to say about life insurance is that it's the earlier the better, because they are going to do a health screening on you, right? So if you wait until you're getting sick or as you get older in age, the price you'll pay is going to increase and the amount you get back is going to be less because they're trying to limit their liability for you being sick or you being a smoker or you having children or you working so many hours a week. All of those things are going to be factored when the adjuster comes and talks to you. So the earlier you can get people in, the better.
Right. And I would also say the earlier you start any kind of investment, like in your 20s, the better off you will be. And that's a time when people think they can't spare the money because they're paying other bills. But if you just take it out and just leave it there, you'll be so much better off.
And I'll just touch on a quick example of what equity does. We talked about life insurance, but equity and property. When I started getting into really working with banks and getting our people in good loans, if your transmission goes out and it costs you $3,000 and you don't own a house, and you have to go get a loan for that money, unless you have it saved, then you're probably paying anywhere from 10 to 20% interest on that $3,000 if it's unsecured without property. If you have a house and you have some equity in it, you need that same $3,000 and you can stretch it out. Instead of that $3,000 costing you $200 to $300 a month, you can get that transmission fixed for anywhere from $50 to $75 a month, because and that interest is deductible and your house is going to increase in value. So it's going to cover what you had to take out from the equity of that house. And so I had a partner in the firm, Joe always drove a nice sports car. That car would have cost me a car payment of about $500 a month on an auto loan. What he did was he would take equity out of his home and go and buy the car. And so then therefore he's paying half that cost because he has it on a mortgage. And again, when he refinances his house or sells it, it's going to pay off the house and the car, and he still gets equity. All I'm doing is paying a bunch of interest on a vehicle that depreciates in value. And that's the difference where the gaps go.
Right, right. Um,
So we do have a couple questions. One would be, should we all have a separate policy? And I believe it's life insurance policy outside of what our employers are offering.
There's probably people on this call that are better experts, but I would say yes. I have good insurance at UK, but if something happens that I get fired tomorrow, I need to have something else in place. Or if I decide to leave,
right,
I need to have something in place to
right.
still provide.
Sometimes the insurance doesn't follow you. Sometimes the policies, you can take them with you, but a lot of times it's just when you're working there and that's it. So I think it's always a good idea to have some insurance outside of work. And also have some insurance on your children, if you can. So. Let's see, one more question and then we'll start to wrap up.
Sure. I don't think I see any more coming in. I don't think I missed any.
Okay. Okay, just some comments. So I really appreciate you, Chantel, and Danny, and Kenneth so much for sharing your personal story, because I do believe that all of us have similar stories. And so I think that we will continue these conversations as we have other workshops. And we just wanted to share a couple of books with you, some resources, and also some of our upcoming events. So these are a couple of books that have some historical perspective. If you want to hear all the history, and it's amazing when you start reading them. I've read The Color of Money about Black banks and some of the things that happened there. It also goes through the historical perspective, very, in fine detail. The Color of Law is all about homes and projects and how all of that came about. So it's really, really fascinating. There's also a video that goes along with The Color of Law, and it's pretty interesting to watch. The other thing I will point out is that an evening with Heather McGee is coming up on Thursday, April 28th from 6:30 to 8:30 at the UK Student Ballroom. She's written a book called The Sum of Us, which I am also reading. It is a wonderful book, and it also takes a look at all the research that she did on her own to come to the solution of the conclusion that racism has a cost to it, a financial cost to racism, and it's not just to people of color, it's to the entire nation. And so if you want to come out for that, it's free. And so take a look on the website and find out more information about that. And those are some resources I think Tana dropped in the chat. McKinsey has a really great information on the economic state of Black America and what it could be. And it talks about everything we've talked about, plus wage gaps and everything else. So it's really good, interesting reading. And there's also an article on the wage gap for women, especially women of color. And Tana, you want to take up the last slide?
Sure. So we do have some events coming up, even though it is April. As we can see, the year is starting to fly by already. So we do want you to mark your calendars. Like Marilyn said, this is just the beginning of this discussion for us. And so we do have a couple of other things planned for the fall and the winter so far. So in September, we plan on having a debt reduction workshop. More details for that at a later date, as well as in December, we will be hosting the Buy Black Lex 365 at the Julietta Market, and all are welcome to attend there. And last but not least, we just want to thank Danny, Chantal, and Kenneth. I mean, this was just a fantastic evening of information. I'm glad I was sitting down because a lot of the information I was just shocked to learn, to be very honest with you. So we just want to thank you for your time as well. And this is a collaboration between the Beta Gamma Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and the UK Rosenberg School of Law. We want to just thank you so much for your time and the information that you've given to us. It is life-changing, and it's going to make us think, not just for tonight, but for some time to come about what we need to do, not only for ourselves, but as a community. And so we just want to thank you so much for everything that you brought and shared with us, especially your stories.
Okay, so thanks again, and thank everybody for joining us, because you could have been anywhere else doing other things and you chose to be with us. So let's take what we've learned and use that in our communities and understand what we see happening with our young people, especially. And then we're not too old to make changes. So let's just go forward with new information and do better. Thank you.